Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be covering from the semifinals of the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Weissenhaus. It is Vincent Keymer versus Magnus Carlsen, and the two of them have met in some pretty prestigious competitions, and it always seems that Magnus wins. And it also makes sense. He is arguably the best chess player who ever lived, alongside some other very notable gentleman, but Vincent is always there, and he's always this close to beating Magnus. Now is as good a chance as any. He does have the white pieces. It's a classical game, plenty of time to make it count, and let's see what happened in this one. So Magnus, or rather Vincent, with white opens with pawn to g4. Not something that you will hear very often with someone having white against Magnus, but in freestyle or in chess960 or official random, it is more common than not. And the position is a pretty weird one. Nothing really odd about it. The knight's placed in the corner. So what I like to do when you have a chess960 position is that you always imagine the knights out of the cage. So if the knights are out of the cage, basically this is what you look at. What is this? Can we somehow make this work into a normal position? And particularly for this one, if you look at the position of the king and rook, you can castle immediately. So if it's white's move and white wants to castle, you can just castle, because those were c1 and d1 are the squares where the king and rook would be if you castled queenside in normal chess. So if you want to do that, you can. Then it's even more resembling a normal position. So these are some of the things that I'm pretty sure players take into consideration before making their first move. And also, if you guys would enjoy that, I could also do some research on what goes into the preparation, like what are the best things to look for when trying to decipher a chess960 position. So watching it more and more, I'm getting I'm creating sort of a liking for it. But okay, let's continue with the analysis. We have pawn to g4 by Vincent, and Magnus goes for knight to g6. We have knight to b3, pawn to e5, and knight to g3. Of course, the knights will come out. We have pawn to f6, freeing up the queen, and pawn to c4. And already Magnus castles queenside. So castles and pawn to d4. And if you look at the situation on the clocks, Vincent already burned 40 minutes of his time. Players start with an hour and a half. Magnus has an hour. Vincent has 50 minutes. And we're only at move 5. So that is how much time players are burning in these first few moves, because if you mess up here, you're gone. Knight to b6. Magnus also brings the other knight into the game, and it's probably the least punishing piece you can use to play in official random, because the knight can always go back. If you move a pawn to a silly square, you could very easily be already lost. We have pawn to d5, pawn to d6, and bishop to f5 with check. Okay, Magnus nicely blocks, offers a trade of bishops. We have pawn to f3 and pawn to a6. We have pawn to e4, Vincent creating a huge center here, and Magnus goes knight to f4. We have bishop captures on d7, rook captures on d7, and now Vincent plays sort of a trolling move. He plays king to c2, but it's a lot trickier than it appears, and that's also, this move is one of the reasons why I'm calling this video a masterclass. Because it's just very, very deep. Now you could continue this a lot of different ways, but if you castle right away, then this pawn can be captured, and then the rook is on d1. And if the pawn is already captured and the path towards the black king opens up, you kind of want your king on b1 and the rook on c1. So I guess Vincent figured this out, and he played this. Maybe it's a bad move, but in practical terms, I would say it's an ingenious move, because now should Magnus capture on c4, then you play king b1, and the rook is already attacking the knight, and you cannot go back because of queen captures on b6, and Magnus can resign. So after king to c2, bishop to a7 by Magnus. There are also some other lines maybe that you can try, But basically, what you would have to do after knight captures and king to b1 is go for this knight to h3 move. Attack the queen because your knight is hanging and the knight cannot go back, and it would be a draw by repetition. Queen g2, knight f4, queen has to go back. Otherwise, if you give up the e3 square, then the knight can come to e3, for example, if you go to h1. So queen g1, knight h3, queen g2, and so on. It will be a draw by repetition. So maybe this was Vincent's offer at a draw. Magnus not taking it, regardless. Bishop to a7, now preparing some nasty discoveries, but Vincent not really interested in that. He just continues development. Bishop to d2. And now, how do you take advantage of this? There's really no good way to do it, as the bishop is also, well, just hanging there on a7. So Magnus plays king to b8. Now the bishop is defended, and bishop to e3. Now, if the knight moves, you can also capture with check. So knight to h3 attacks the queen. We have queen to g2, and now knight to f4. We have queen to f2. Now Vincent... very much looking forward to playing this for a win, and Magnus does not repeat. He probably Vincent would go queen to e2 if Magnus repeated knight to h3. So Magnus goes pawn to h5, and now rook f to d1. We have h captures, f captures, and now, okay, you are maybe threatening to win a pawn here, so just knight to c8 by Magnus, not allowing the bishop to go to f4. We have pawn to c5, now blocking the bishop on a7, and d captures on c5. We have bishop captures on c5, pawn to g6, limiting the movements of Vincent's knight on g3, and bishop captures on a7. We have knight captures and king to b1. Vincent successfully artificially castles. We have queen to h7, and now knight to c5. Going after the rook, rook d6 by Magnus will be useful as a defender, but also rook to b6 will be a very, very nice move by Magnus. Knight to e2, Vincent offers a trade of knights, and Magnus obliges. Knight captures, queen captures, and now knight to b5. Magnus activates the lonely knight on a7. We have queen to c4 by Vincent, and now Magnus goes rook to c8. You could also maybe consider rook to b6. It's a very tricky move, and the rook is very, very well placed there. It cannot be attacked. Like if knight a4, already knight a3 wins the game. The pawn is pinned, then you're going to win the queen on c4. So, you know, it's a nice square for the rook. But Magnus goes for rook to c8 first, and now pawn to a4. Kicks away the knight. Okay, Magnus was basically just remaneuvering that knight to d4. It's a beautiful square. Pawn to g5, breaking down Magnus's pawn chain, and rook c to d8. We have a g captures on f6, rook captures, and the rook to f1. Vincent offers a trade of rooks, and Magnus goes to b6 now. So rook to b6 and rook to f2. And serving as a defender of the b2 pawn, of the h2 pawn. Also, you can double up on the f file if needed. Maybe a nice rook lift to f7. So anything is possible. We have pawn to g5 by Magnus and the king to a2. Magnus also improves the position of his king. We have king to a7, and now Vincent plays rook c to f1. And it seems almost self-explanatory why the rook is on, the other rook just came to f1. You want to play rook to f7. Or maybe it just seems that way, because here Magnus played pawn to g4, and I guess Vincent was worried about queen captures on h2, but rook to f7, you capture on c7, and this is a lost position for Magnus. But Vincent, with 1 minute on the clock, goes queen to c3. And okay, queen to c3. We have knight to f3 by Magnus, now stopping the rooks, also putting more pressure on that h2 pawn. Rook to g2, going after the g4 pawn, and now rook to g8 by Magnus. Magnus now also getting very low on time. Rook f to f2, doubling up on the second rank. Again, excellent at defending and also, you know, for attacking purposes. And Magnus has to be very, very careful not to put something on the f file, like you put, or rather no, he has to make sure not to leave the rook on g8 undefended, for example, or play something like here, because then rook captures and you can resign. So here, rook to d6 by Magnus. I imagine a waiting move, or maybe he's trying to get that rook into the game on the king side somehow. I have no idea what rook to d6 is. But Vincent plays queen to e3, and now Magnus, well, he doesn't want to see any nasty discoveries here, goes king to a8, and now we have knight to e6. And this is now a problem because Magnus, although in a very, very difficult position, it's hard to even say what Magnus could play. Probably just move the king around, let's say king b8 or rook to d7, something, you know, waiting for Vincent what to do. But Magnus played pawn to c6. He actively challenged Vincent's strong center, and now Magnus is completely lost. However, it is not an easy move to spot. Feel free to pause the video and figure it out while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this incredible idea. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is queen captures. I'm only kidding. It is queen to a3. This is the move. And the move c6 has weakened the rook on d6. And not only that, I wish it was only that, because it's if you don't really look for it, you will not see it. But the problem is, how do you react? We already said that the queen cannot really move. If you try to defend the rook with the queen, then this rook is saying you just capture on f3, and that's it. G captures, rook captures with check, king a7, rook goes here, attacks the queen. The queen will have to move further, and then you will pick up this rook as well, and you're gonna be up on knight and the rook. But of course, Magnus would resign way before that even happened. And the other problem is, if you just move the rook, let's say rook to d7, look at this, knight f8. Forks the rook and the queen, because the queen from a3 defends the knight on f8. So it's a very, very unfortunate square for the rook, if not defended by the c6 pawn. So there really isn't anything Magnus can do here, and especially since he's very low on time, below the 1 minute mark. He played rook captures on e6, Vincent recaptured, and now Magnus almost lost on time. He played his next move with 1 second on the clock. He played rook to c8, and here Vincent started, you know, thinking about the position. He already saw the move he was going to play. He reached out for the rook, but Magnus quickly grabbed his hand mid the rook pickup and congratulated him on his victory. And it was in this position on move 39 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Of course, Vincent will just gobble up the g4 pawn, and that's it. There's no way for you to do anything here. You're down the exchange, the knight is probably lost within a few moves. There's the past e6 pawn to worry about. There's nothing. Like, if you try to save the knight, like, we could just play a few moves like rook f7. I mean, that is disgusting. Queen to h8, let's say queen b3, you threaten checkmate. If the rook say defends against checkmate, the other rook comes, and okay, now you can maybe play something like this, but rook c7 attacks the queen, kicks away the queen, and that's pretty much it. You will start capturing on g7, and game over. Or maybe, you know, if you like funny stuff, maybe on something like this, the queen moves, you can go here, and if the queen goes back or anything like that, you can even sacrifice the queen and then deliver a nice checkmate here. So even this is possible. I don't know, however you like it. But yeah, Vincent takes down Magnus in their first classical game with the white pieces, but now we get to see Magnus in a must-win situation where he has the white pieces, and well, that can only be good for us, the viewers. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Big congratulations to Vincent on this massive undertaking. I would like to thank Andreas Rosenthal, David Bacon, Andrew Steinel, Yuri Ralchenko, and Nathaniel Devlin for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions, but mostly covering this event until it finishes. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.